Just a last minute sound check. Check 1, 2, 1, 2. Streaming live now. This is just a last minute sound check. You're okay? Everybody's okay? Good. We'll be live in 5 minutes.
Good morning. Before we go into our program, Jen, Gabi, and Jadine will give a territorial acknowledgement.
Good morning. We would like to begin by acknowledging that McGill University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganege-Haga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. So many events these days start out like that, and to talk about why we do land acknowledgements and why they are not enough, I'd like to introduce Jadine Lavallee, who will be joining us for the next 2 days and bringing her critical perspective to the work we do, specifically in the Justice and Decolonization Working Group. So, yay! Woo. So Jadine is a Two-Spirit Michif Cree woman with mixed French, Scottish, and Swedish heritage. Her family is from Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. She currently lives in Dish with One Spoon territory, also known as Hamilton, and she spends most of her efforts on anti-extractive and land defense struggles, but also has dedicated herself to defending her city against gentrification, fighting patriarchy inside and outside organizing circles, and pushing for animal liberation. As an anarchist, she maintains the importance of grassroots organizing and supports a diversity of tactics, prioritizing direct action and mutual aid as a way to bring about collective liberation. So Jadine will explain more about land acknowledgements and why they're not enough.
Thank you, Jen. So thanks for that introduction. Other relevant things I would say, because I'm speaking here to a bunch of academics, is that I got my undergrad from Wilfrid Laurier University and have, as of yet, decided not to go back for any further post-secondary for a variety of reasons that we may get into in the course of the next 2 days. But when I graduated, the first thing I did was I worked at the OPIRG for like 3 years. And in that role as an Indigenous woman at the university, it became very clear around that time the school was very interested in doing land acknowledgement workshops for staff and faculty. That's okay, don't worry about it. For me to be giving land acknowledgements all over the place. And within a period of a few short years, I decided that was completely useless. Because not only had the school adopted their own land acknowledgement that was now at the bottom of every statement they put out and every header of every email that was sent, but the actual words and actions behind it weren't really being met. And also during that time and during that process, which as we know, establishing land acknowledgements and those kind of protocols were kind of a call, like a response to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I also became pretty critical of reconciliation as a Canadian project. And that's something we most definitely will talk about today if you're around me. I'm critical of it because I believe that doing land acknowledgements right now is simply acknowledging the history of colonialism without writing it, and that the guidelines of reconciliation don't actually offer a framework in order to pursue true reconciliation, which to me would be a decolonial effort to return land, to return sovereignty to people, because there is no sovereignty without land. And so I think they fall short, and I think that while we're doing land acknowledgements, that's a great thing, but it's completely meaningless if it's not attached to actual action, support, and on-the-ground solidarity with Indigenous folks. So I actually stopped doing those workshops, and I started doing other workshops, actually with Jen recently, about why I think reconciliation is not enough, why I think it falls short, and why I think what we need to be doing is pushing for a much wider and more radical transformation of settler-colonial relations here. So with that, I'll just end it there. But I'll hand it back to Jen, and we have one issue we just want to bring light to at the beginning of this so that we can kind of put that a little bit into practice.
So there's this push to go beyond symbolic actions of land acknowledgement. So we'd like to let you know that the people we mentioned earlier, the Ganege-Haga, there's ongoing struggles over land, including right now it's the 7th day of a hunger strike in Genesatake. This is the place of the land dispute in Oka in 1990, and it's ongoing. And this hunger strike is to raise awareness and to put pressure on the government. The demand is for a moratorium on land development until the contested land, the territory is, the contested land is resolved. So there's many actions we can take today as a community. One is there's a petition going around you can sign. Two, they're asking people to call their MLAs and MPs and put pressure for this moratorium. So people have been calling for days around Montreal, all kinds of organizations, so you can call. You can come to us today to ask for what the numbers are, what you should say, and if you call your MP or your MLA. And also we're collecting donations today. We're gonna put the jar on the table there. Please feel free to make a donation, and we're gonna get it to the Ellen Gabriel and the other leaders of the Longhouse in Ganasitake who are organizing around this this land dispute. So those are some ways we could take this symbolic action, make it material. So thank you.
Thank you, Jadine and Jen. Welcome, everybody. This is a great event for most of us here in this room who've been involved in this program for a number of years, and it's great. It's a kind of a community. Almost everybody knows everybody else, and it's really a wonderful feeling to be here with you all. So just a few introductory remarks. This is being live streamed and recorded, right? So you're informed now. I don't know quite what to do with that, but maybe avoid certain behaviors, I guess, is the idea. Right? Okay, so I just want to talk about how this program came about. So when I was director of the environment program at in the School of Public Affairs at the University of Maryland, I was fortunate enough to hire Herman Daly from the World Bank. Herman, it's known to most of you who've studied ecological economics, particularly Josh, who's co-authored a textbook with him, was maybe the leading figure in ecological economics in that period. And he had had a long-standing critique with Robert Solow and other people in the mainstream, and he had never received a reply to any of his critiques. Their technique was to stonewall anybody who opposed them. And when I moved to McGill in 1998, I found that ecological economics was marginalized at best. And once in the formerly frozen North, I got to know Peter Victor and Ellie Perkins better, and also John Erickson and Josh Farley at UVM. So I've come to call this group the Disgruntled Five, right? So I don't know if Ellie knew that she was one of that distinguished group, but people who were systematically and deeply dissatisfied with the current direction of society and particularly the economic framework in which society has become immersed and regretfully is the main lodestone we use for thinking about the future. It occurred to us, the Disgruntled Five, that ecological economics was in danger of going extinct, and that neoclassical economics would carry the day by default. This seemed to me to be a clear and present danger to life's commonwealth. The wholly instrumental view of nature and the growth imperative would soon digest and defecate the world I love. We met and resolved not to go down by default. We aim to educate 40 to 60 people in the basics of ecological economics and to confer PhD degrees on them where appropriate. Suzanne Moore gave us a needed grant, some needed money for grant writing. And Jeff Garver unleashed his formidable training as a lawyer in writing compelling text and keeping an orderly process intact. Alejandra Zaga Mendez was just an amazing ability to help this project get going, to plan it, to control the really massive information involved. And I think our final grant proposal was well over 150 pages. So Taylor Ricketts, who's head of the Gund Institute in Vermont, also joined us from time to time and offered important insights on how to get through the complicated system in which we were then embedded. So it took us 3 times to make it, right? We said it got rejected once because they didn't like our letter of intent. Another time, they liked our letter of intent, but they didn't have any money to give us. So on number 3 try, we did it. And I think, Jeff can correct me if I have this number wrong, we were 8th in all of Canada in that competition. So anyway, and I remember kind of a somewhat panicked phone call with John when we told him that we'd gotten the grant. He said, "Oh my goodness, now we're going to have to do all the work." Right, so that was certainly right. So thanks for joining us today as this 6-year effort draws to a close. Today and tomorrow we offer a taste of what we have learned together. It is especially appropriate that this event is at McGill, where Frederick Soddy, a very important figure in the development of ecological economics, where Frederick Soddy worked with Rutherford to ground the theory of the atom near the beginning of the 20th century. So we are trying to reground economics in a conception, a up-to-date conception of the evolution of the universe. Anyway, welcome. Thank you very much for coming. I think John Erickson's going to talk to us. Ellie, sorry. Yes, sorry. Yeah, me, Ellie, and John in that order. Right?
So it is wonderful to be in a room with all of you, people who have been working together for such a long time on this project. And I would just like to say that Peter Brown is the one who has initiated this and kept it going from the beginning. And he's brought his formidable grant writing skills and his passion, right, to doing this project. My own connection and commitment to this is really around 2 kind of interrelated things, which are, number 1, what is left out of neoclassical economics, what's left out of econometrics, what's left out of government statistics usually, and all of the pieces of unpaid work, but also ecological inputs, and also services that deal with the outputs of the traditional, of what we know as the economy. Those things are hard to measure. They happen in an elegant set of systems that allow for multitasking and for intelligent integration of human activities with the activities of the rest of the ecosystem and those of non-human living things. And neoclassical economics, as we know very well, is not good and often refuses to try to get a hold of that. I think economics sees itself as something that's apart from this other complicated, elegant, beautiful, systemic environment in which the economy sits. And so really the problem is, as I see it, the problem is the prioritization of a neoclassical economics viewpoint in policy circles, governance circles, and other circles, because it's a simple model and it purports to tell you the bottom line. Therefore, you don't have to think about what you're doing. Just follow the bottom line. Go ahead and make that decision. But you know, what ecological economics highlights is the very short-sighted and, in fact, tragic and unjust results that come from doing that kind of, from making policy in that way. And so that what that has led us to, I think many of us who have been thinking about this for a while, and that includes everybody in this room pretty much, right, is that governance systems are really at the heart of the issue. It's governance systems that rely on a neoclassical bottom line to make their decisions that need overhaul, and that need questioning, and that need revisioning and rebuilding. And so the piece about, or the importance of decolonization is exactly in pulling in this other question about the injustice and the wrongs that have flown from the imposition of Western-style governance systems on traditional ways of doing things that were thousands of years old and very elegant in their sustainable processes. And so the challenge that we're now facing, which is the challenge of climate change, but it's also a challenge of global equity, and it's a challenge of local equity as well, is a challenge of deciding together somehow, figuring out a way to move into an era where we can govern ourselves more sustainably, differently, and where we can figure out how to make amends for the injustices that have been done to indigenous peoples and their governance systems, and try to walk together somehow into a future that allows the resurgence of sustainable systems without sacrificing some of the good things that people have come to expect from their economies, like maybe healthcare or universal education, but that already existed, or universal food supply and poverty reduction, but that already existed. We need to revisit, I think, what our priorities are, and rebuild governance systems that will really work. So that is my commitment to this project, has always been my commitment to what we're trying to do. And I hope that my university, at York University in Toronto, will be able to continue its participation in ongoing work on this, because we bring so many students who already have passion into our student-directed graduate programs. So thank you. I don't want to talk too long. John.
Okay. Well, welcome again, and thank you, Peter and Ellie, for kicking things off, and thank you so much for giving us some action to do instead of an acknowledgement. My name's John Erickson. I think I know everyone from the University of Vermont, but I just want to say before we go into our speed talks that how proud I am of all of you. Working through a master's or a PhD is no small feat. Some of you are still in the depth of that experience. Some of you have actually hatched and have been born into the world as E4A graduates, so thank you so much for all your work. Reflecting on this event this morning, I'm actually realizing that with all of you, I'm part of a recent kind of third wave, a third attempt of doing exactly what Peter described. The first wave really kind of came out of the formalization of ecological economics in the late 80s, early 90s. When the Society for Ecological Economics was established, the journal, books, textbooks, etc. But there was no place you could go to study ecological economics. So Josh Farley and myself were disgruntled PhD students at Cornell together, and we had to kind of find ecological economics ourselves and pick and choose classes and be real pains in the butts to our professors as we were asked to be indoctrinated in this economic worldview that, speaking for myself and Josh, were very disgruntled about, and thought it didn't make a whole lot of sense to go to a science class and hear a worldview, go to a philosophy or an ethics class and hear a worldview, and go to an economics class and hear a completely diametrically opposed worldview. The second wave, I was fortunate to be, my first job out of grad school was hired at the economics department of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where myself and John Gowdy and Sabine O'Hare, we had the crazy idea of creating a PhD program called ecological economics at the oldest engineering school in the United States. And we had some success. We were able to create upwards of 20 or so PhD students in ecological economics, who called themselves ecological economics, who are now starting to create the foundation for a movement, especially within econ departments, to turn a tide. But it was short-lived. It was kind of an inspired vision of a few people rather than an inclusive vision of many. Those students went on and found jobs not in North America. Many of them went on and found jobs at Leeds University, in Vienna, in Barcelona, in Australia, which is now where you see, this many years later, ecological economics. But there was a lot of resistance in North America. There really was, we were creating a new supply, but there was no demand in North America whatsoever. What was the word you used? Stonewalled. So beyond a few select places, there was nothing happening. So this third wave was really reflecting on this kind of gap between all these bright, brilliant people who we trained in that second wave at RPI and other places, but who kind of went elsewhere. They went to Europe. And in this third wave, to focus here in North America, the cause of so much of the world's problems, I'm just so pleased to see that we've created a group of like-minded folks, a group of folks who are going to become the heads of NGOs, the heads of governments, no pressure, the heads of new departments, and really kind of create that vision, but a more, not as much as we'd like, but a more inclusive vision that brings in a broader group of people that is starting to really lean into questions around justice and not just environmental sustainability. And I think this time around, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's demand for what you all are teaching. I say that very hesitantly. I think the social movement now is in place. That wasn't so much before. I think there is a youth movement in particular that is demanding from their faculty, much like Josh and I did from our faculty at Cornell, to stop teaching us this bullshit. Excuse me. We need another. There are other ways, and it's not like we have to invent this from scratch either. So, I hate to sound like an economist, but you're the supply, and maybe the demand is there. So here we go. And this symposium is really a celebration of 6 years of this third wave. And I've seen such dramatic influence within our professional societies, within the cultures of our 3 universities, the effects that are happening now by planting subversive thinkers in places like the World Bank, places like the Nature Conservancy, places like the Bank of France. We're seeing the initial effects of this third wave, so this is just the beginning. Can't wait to watch what happens. So, should we start our speed talks? Yes? All right. So, I went last because... You want to switch over for me? Sure. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so here's the rules of the game. We did not want to design a symposium where this is happening, right? Speeches and no interaction and a very kind of passive symposium. We wanted to design a more active symposium. But we also want to hear from all the great things that our students are involved with in their research. So these are speed talks, okay? 3 minutes, okay? 3-minute talks to plant some ideas, plant some seeds, give us a scope of what your work is about. And each of these, we'll do 3 rounds of this. Each round will last between 20 and 30 minutes. And then you're gonna have a nice 20, 25-minute discussion. Each of the 5 to 6 people in each round will go to a table, and you'll have an opportunity to sit and actually have a conversation, okay? So 3 minutes to plant some seeds, and then each person gets to have a conversation with all of us for 20 to 25 minutes. So as this is happening, please write your questions down, okay? Because you're gonna hear 5, 6 talks in a row, rapid fire. Write your questions down. There's some paper and pens on the table. There's Post-it notes. After the speed talk round concludes, you can join a table. You certainly are welcome to switch tables, okay? So you can start at one table, move to another. You're certainly welcome to write questions down, and if you didn't get to a table, you can hand those questions to your speaker and follow up at lunch and other times. But really the intention is to plant some seeds and have a conversation. It is being live streamed, as Peter noted. 3-minute time limits, table discussion, take notes, write questions, and let's get to work. Ready to go? So Laura is going to kick things off for us. Laura Gilbert is a PhD student here at McGill University, part of our Economics for the Anthropocene program. Getting my stopwatch ready.
I just want to test this out. Okay. Hi, everyone. Just making sure everything works. So, as was mentioned, my name is Laura, and today I will be talking to you about a very specific type of game. But first, I just want to quickly go over these images. I'm sure many of you have seen the first one over there. So it represents a shift from an anthropocentric worldview, where the human male is on top, to a more ecocentric worldview, where we are just one piece of a larger ecosystem. And this is a worldview that's necessary to get us to a transition into the Ecozoic. And how we can do that is by promoting certain values that people might have. And when I say values here, I mean kind of these traits and things that we live by and we apply in everyday life. It's a little messed up, but these two that are in green on top, in the self-transcendence category, universalism and benevolence, are the values that are associated with pro-environmental behavior. And they represent kind of extending your sense of self to include other humans and non-humans in that little circle. And this has actually been associated with a very specific type of water governance, which is my field of research, and that's integrated water resource management, or IWRM for short. And so to practice good IWRM, research has shown that you need to have these self-transcendent values guide your decision-making process. But it can be really hard to teach people about making decisions that affect complex systems, and so games have been used as a tool to teach people exactly that. And a specific game that's used in water management is called Aqua Republica, and it was developed by the UN Environmental Program and the Danish Hydrological Institute, with the specific goal to teach players about integrated water resource management. And so to see if it could actually do that, I teamed up with the Bioresource Engineering Department at McGill, and we conducted 5 different game events with a total of 63 participants. And these were students of the IWRM Master's Program, as well as different stakeholder groups and watershed associations across Eastern Canada. And we wanted to see if it could change people's values and kind of see their decision-making process. And what we found is that the game did not promote these self-transcendence values, although it claimed to be teaching about IWRM. And it created a lot of value conflicts in the players as they were playing, especially around the different goals it gave participants. And so it had a really strong emphasis on trying to get them to build these fossil fuel energy plants, like let's say this coal mine, and also oil refineries, and even nuclear. And there were a lot of great discussions that happened within the groups. And there was also a big emphasis on growth, growth of the economy within the game, but also of the population growth. And so what this research showed us is that although we have these tools that are supposed to help promote certain ideas, when we take a critical look at them, we can uncover some normative principles in there, like this one of water as a resource, and also this pro-growth bias. And so we have to really be careful what tools we use to teach people about this new way of thinking. Thank you.
Excellent. Nice job. 3 minutes. Okay, so next is Gabriel Yaya Hage. He's also a PhD student here at McGill University. And he's going to be talking about bringing together young academics, the innovative ideas for environmentalism initiative.
Hi, I'm Gabriel, and today I'll be talking about the Innovative Ideas for Environmentalism initiative. So this was done as a part of an internship with E4A and working under the auspices of the École project in Montreal. Now the mandate of this initiative was to bring together young academics, mostly undergraduates from widely different fields, and through mediated discussions and facilitation, try to work and understand a topic in environmentalism. The idea was to get them to choose which topic they wanted to work on. Early on, it was decided as a group that Indigenous struggles would be a good topic to work on. It was also decided that focusing on one case study in a region would be interesting, partly due to the work I've done in the region. The Bayano region in Panama was chosen as the place. This is a place that has faced a lot of indigenous land tenure issues as well as biodiversity loss. So in the initiative, each person was tasked with choosing a component of the Bayano region, could be almost any component, and then write a paper about this. This was then presented at a symposium that was also organized by participants. In that symposium, it was open to the public, and there was even a film screening by a group of young people that had made a film from the Bayano region. Now the topics ranged from rhetorical methods used by indigenous and non-indigenous, the roles of tourism and how they can impact different stakeholders, international and non-international stakeholders. Now there's a couple lessons I learned from the project. Generally, they were actually quite good when it came to letting other people talk. No one really monopolized the conversation in those situations. More generally, I was gratified to see that people were willing to work for something beyond the requirements of their educational system. Usually we think of young academics that they work towards a diploma. So it's kind of gratifying to see their eagerness, their willingness, and even eagerness to work at a topic for its own sake. I think that when we go through developing the Ecozoic, initiatives such as this are important to include young people in the movement, as we saw with the Fridays for the Future movement, in order to create a balanced human nature, a beneficial human nature mutual way of living. Young people have to be included, and this is only one of probably many methods to approach that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So our next presenter is Jen Gabi. Jen just recently successfully defended her dissertation, so congratulations. Here at McGill, Jen is completing her PhD at McGill and has started a postdoc at Concordia, right? So graduating and a job.
Thank you so much. I'm going to use notes because my brain is fried, is destroyed from defending last week and preparing for that. So anyhow, so my project, my PhD project has been called More Powerful Together, Collaborative Theorizing with Social Movements about Decarbonizing and Decolonizing Canada. So when I started my PhD in 2014, I was deeply concerned about climate change and also inequality. But I was really fixated on this question of how the hell does large-scale systems change happen? It was not obvious to me. How we do this kind of change that would address climate change, but also undo massive inequalities and ongoing injustices. So over the last 5 years, I've been exploring that question through having interviews, surveys, many conversations with people active in the climate justice, anti-pipeline, and Indigenous land defense movements across Canada. And one of the questions I asked in these conversations was, how do you think large-scale system change happens? And when I put all their answers together into one lens or bring them all into dialogue, this is what has emerged from that change happens, or large-scale change happens through a convergence of the context in which we act, the way we take action, the understandings, values, and worldviews that undergird our actions, and also importantly, how all the different strategies, all the different efforts relate. And that in order for all the pieces to fit together in a transformative way, we need coordination. And in order to have coordination across different parts of movements, across different communities, there needs to be relationships, strong relationships of solidarity. And to have those good relationships, we need to be undoing relations of domination. So the main takeaway here for me from these conversations is that there's a need to think and act more holistically in ways that account for, integrate, and include much more than our current modes of activism and our current understandings of change facilitate. But what also came up is the tensions that exist within our movements over conflicting theories of change. And I've noticed similar tensions within academic circles as well as the ecological economics community. These conflicting theories and larger debates about does change happen from the top down or the bottom up? Does it happen from inside the system or from pushing from outside of the system? Does it happen through reformist strategies or radical strategies? Does it happen through individual action or through collective action? So on and on. And so I see these dualized sort of binary ways of conceiving change as hindering our capacity for massive collective action. So in the conclusion of the thesis, I propose a sort of using relationality or as a conceptual basis for working across difference, for thinking across different conceptions of change and different approaches to making change. So I propose some concrete strategies for doing this, for bringing resistance strategies together with solution strategies, for sort of working across this radical reform divide, and other concrete applications of relationality. But to conclude, what I want to say here is that in order to meaningfully address the pressing social and ecological crisis of the Anthropocene and to move towards the Ecozoic, we need to develop the kind of relationalities that can inspire and maintain strong collaborations across difference. And these strong relations can only exist based on equality. So building a strong force for change requires undoing all forms of oppression and domination. So that's people over nature, that's people over other people, that's classism, sexism, racism, settler colonialism. So tackling these crises means decolonizing our relations with land and with each other. That means a massive redistribution of decision-making and decision-making power and land. And so to do that, settlers need to learn to step back and learn to listen and listen hard. So let's do some of that. Okay.
Okay, so we have another PhD student from McGill University. John Adams is going to join us and talk about what the heck is well-being. I want to know myself.
We got 2 what the hecks in a row. That was not planned, by the way. This gobbledygook here, sociocultural ecological psychophysiology. This is just, I put this chart up here just as a little schematic of all the different aspects that are involved that we need to take into account to meaningfully understand the phenomenon of well-being. Ecological economics has spent a lot of good work arguing with and contrasting and countering neoclassical economics vision of the economy and of the human as homo economicus. It's come up with a great pre-analytic vision of the economy as embedded, but hasn't come up with a pre-analytic vision of the human. So that's basically what I'm working on, synthesizing a variety of different disciplines in order to come to not only an embedded understanding of the human, but one that goes beyond just market behavior to really understand the motivational dynamics of the human as an organism. And also not just economic development, but psychological human development, and where that leads, and what is well-being, what is flourishing, beyond just consumption as the correlate of quality of life, which I think we can basically agree that that vision is wrong, but we don't have an accurate vision yet. So some conclusions that are coming into view are that disconnection from body-social relationship and the broader Earth context leads to dysfunction on a variety of levels. The conditions of human thriving are those that support connection, authenticity, and personal growth, and that we as humans have an innate orientation toward those nutriments for our thriving, that there is a nature that culture is in dialogue with, a nature that constrains and enables culture, and that those nutriments are not consumptive or rival, where if I get it, then you don't, but actually if I get it, it actually helps you to get it too. So this is good news for us as we try to come up with a political philosophy toward well-being, to know what it is, to have any political philosophy is based on some notion of human nature, at least implicitly, and of the good life. So having a better sense of what that is, it's not the neoclassical version, but what is it? That'll help us get there.
Great, thank you so much. Our next presenter is Phoebe Spencer. Phoebe completed her PhD at the University of Vermont in the first cohort of E4A. I believe she was the first PhD graduate from the program. Yes? She's now at the World Bank, and she's going to talk about the challenge of sustainable development.
Thanks, John. Morning, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about some observations I've made working with various international development organizations over the past few years, rather than a specific research topic. I'm going to start with the 2030 agenda. So over the past decade or so, the international development community has made this big shift toward looking at sustainability as a major goal. And that includes through things like the Sustainable Development Goals. The problem here is that this is still based in this notion of infinite growth, of consumption, of sort of traditional development with kind of this ecological framework plopped on top of it without much change underneath. So the 2030 agenda ultimately requires a paradigm shift in order to truly achieve some level of sustainability. I think ecological economics offers one great framework to do that. So if we take, for instance, Herman Daly's notions of allocation, distribution, and scale, and we look at how we can retool the current international development agenda, we can actually make a little progress right there. So right now we can look at, okay, well maybe, Herman Daly's prioritization of scale, first of all, so looking at the scale of what we're doing within the ecosystem, prioritizing that first over distribution and then over allocation or efficiency. Maybe we're not there yet. However, there are some advances already beyond kind of a typical neoclassical framework in international development. So we can see there's some elements of prioritizing distribution over allocation already. However, we can't just then implement scale on top of that. And we can't just look at things going straight from kind of an only social view to an only ecological view and sacrifice distribution, because a lot of the point of international development is to better lives by, say, redistributing wealth, creating social protection, that kind of thing. So we really need to switch from a social to a truly socio-ecological view of international development. That, of course, offers a lot of other challenges. For instance, ensuring that this doesn't justify colonialism, ensuring that actually the wealthier countries, the donor countries that we often talk about in international development, are actually holding themselves accountable for their own resource use and not offshoring things like pollution or resource extraction, but actually holding themselves accountable and working with local communities in areas that are traditionally kind of the targets for international development to ensure that they are working with their own societies in ways that are most appropriate for them and the ways that they want. Additionally, I think that's kind of my main point here, but to ensure that this really takes hold, ecological economics is not the only option for this, but something that we can use as one tool, and is going to require a lot of input from academic organizations, from NGOs, from civil society in order to achieve a truly sustainable 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Okay, so our sixth speaker and our final speaker for this first round of Speed Talks is Kelly Hamshaw. Kelly is completing her PhD also at the University of Vermont.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here this morning. I'm also going to refer to my notes because I'm a little fried from just all the teaching recently. So anyways, I am a PhD student at the University of Vermont, and I'm a member of the climate justice cohort, which relates really nicely to the work I've been doing with mobile home park communities over the past 7 years or so. My work is focused on looking at this notion of compounding vulnerabilities within these really unique communities that house some of Vermont's lowest income residents in our state. And so looking at rural communities more specifically, you might think of scenes like these, tranquil, idyllic, wonderful places to work, live, and play. However, when we look at who is vulnerable to climate change and bearing the disproportionate burden from climate change, we look and see that it's often our most vulnerable residents that are bearing the greatest burden. This map shows the storm track of Tropical Storm Irene in 2011, and the red dots are the 20 mobile home park communities that saw with brutal devastation, how this is already impacting and has been impacting us for a long time. And so when we think about who is living in these parks and who is bearing the greatest burden, my work is really looking at trying to bring greater understanding, along with empathy and compassion. A lot of stakeholders during this time really question whether these communities should exist at all, without consulting local community groups and the residents themselves. And so really arguing for a greater understanding of how these vulnerabilities compound amongst each other, looking at mobile home parks as the front lines of climate justice in the Green Mountain State, which a lot of people don't like to talk about, and back home, and then laying out a roadmap for strategies that we can use to employ and implement for building greater resilience in these really unique and vitally important communities in our state. So thinking about moving away from the Anthropocene and bridging to the Ecozoic, using a resilience building approach, really dedicating resources to increase that understanding, compassion, and empathy about this notion of compounding vulnerabilities, looking at implementing strategies to address all of the dimensions of vulnerability, and really look for those leverage points in the systems to do that. And then finally, to seek opportunities for effective hazard mitigation. A lot of this work is actually already underway through more inclusive planning processes that truly engage folks at the local level. I'll leave it there.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind, could you grab your notes, grab your coffees, grab your snacks, stand up, and come to the front of the room, everybody. We can do this. Let's mix it up. Everyone come to the front of the room. And then our 6 speakers, come on up. Come on up to the front of the room. All right. Jen, go grab a table. We're gonna stay in this room and have a conversation. Kelly, grab a table. Laura, where's Laura? Laura, grab a table. Okay. John, grab a table. Maybe the back corner so we can spread out a little bit. Phoebe, where's Phoebe? Phoebe, grab a table. Okay. Kelly, did Kelly grab a table? Yep, Kelly, Phoebe, John, Jen, who did I miss? Oh, Gabrielle. Gabrielle, grab a table. All right, so the intent here is to have a wonderful, vigorous, fascinating conversation with our 3 presenters, okay? So, presenters, just stand up, so we'll do it one more time. Okay, so Laura's table's over here, Jen is here, Kelly's here, Gabriel's there, John's here, and Phoebe's here. So, pick a speaker to chat with, and remember, you can switch tables partway through. We'll go for about 20 minutes. Okay, sorry to interrupt, but just take a few minutes to wrap up, answer a final question, and we're going to start in about 3 minutes. Okay, we are going to start our second session. You're welcome to stay where you are or remix yourselves. Got to go back to my home seat. Yeah. Okay, if everyone could grab their seats. I know. Okay, so our next session, we will have 5 presenters. Stefano, our 13th presenter on your schedule, was unable to attend. But we're going to start this session with Caitlin Morgan, who is completing her PhD in the E4A program at the University of Vermont. Caitlin.
Free applause is awesome. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about my vision of agriculture and from my work. The 3 pillars of sustainability are sometimes called, the 3 pillars are economic, social, and environmental sustainability. And we also heard this from Phoebe. In EE, it's allocation, distribution, and scale. Sometimes we talk about them in terms of justice, sustainability, and efficiency. And in sustainable agriculture conversations, this comes up a lot of the time. How can we grow food in a way that stewards the land, provides affordable food and livelihoods, and maintains viable business plans? There's always a little catch at the end of those conversations. And what I've seen in my primary research and my secondary research and just being parts of those communities and conversations is that these components are really less like pillars, and they're more like the impossible trinity in economics, which is to say that you might be able to achieve 2 of them, but you're really, really unlikely to be able to achieve all 3 at once. And my basic argument to you today is that it's not possible for the vast majority of farmers, at least in North America, to produce food ecologically, pay themselves and their workers fairly, and maintain the profit margins necessary to continue farming in this capitalistic system that we have. And if you're thinking in your head like, oh wait, but I know this really amazing farm that actually does all 3 of them and they're just killing it on all levels, then what I would suggest to you is that you know about that farm because it's highly notable, because it's one of the exceptions that proves the rule. So the other point that I'd like to make is that not only are these 3 things not really possible to maintain at the same time, the goal of economic efficiency often crowds out the other 2 and makes them much, much harder to pursue. I've seen people who go into farming for the best reasons, environmental reasons and social reasons, and then at the end of the day, they have to compromise on those things in order to stay in farming. It's not a situation I think any of us would really want to promote. So what I'm submitting to you today is that if we want a food system that sustains an ecozoic, that sustains flourishing communities of humans and non-humans, then we really need to focus on those goals, the flourishing of humans and non-humans. And perhaps we need to move on from caring about economic efficiency. I would love to talk to you guys about this if that's really raising your hackles, but at least stop putting an impossible trinity onto the work of farming and farmers. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Okay, so sticking with the food theme, we're going to hear from Sam Bliss, who is a PhD student at the University of Vermont.
So in every human society ever, people organize themselves to meet their material needs from their environments without buying and selling. So outside of markets and in societies that don't have markets, things are distributed through reciprocal gift exchange, centralized redistribution systems, and communistic sharing, which is the kind of sharing we would ideally do with our families, from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. And a lot of production also happens for one's own consumption and production of things like beauty and public goods for everyone. So these non-market economies have been studied by feminist scholars and also anthropologists, but they're largely ignored when we talk about the economy, and therefore people don't seem to even realize they exist. When I tell people I study non-market food systems in Vermont, they're sometimes like, do people still do that? As if they Venmo their friends every time they're invited over for dinner, which maybe they do, and that's messed up. Yes, people still garden, hunt, fish, forage, glean dumpster food with no intention to sell it. People share meals at potlucks and community dinners. People share food with their housemates, gift it to their neighbors, donate it to, and pick it up from food pantries. They serve food for free to strangers in the street with solidarity collectives like Food Drop Bombs. And I'd say these non-market food systems and non-market economies in general are worth studying and participating in and encouraging and experimenting with and dreaming up for a few reasons. First is that markets direct good things like food toward money. So you have the situation where today in the world, more than 1 billion people suffer food insecurity simply because they're poor, more than enough food's produced for everyone, and about half of it goes to industrially farmed livestock, biofuel refineries, and the waste stream. So there's got to be a better way than markets to allocate that food and other good things. Also, as Caitlin just said, markets force farmers and other producers to prioritize financial viability over goals like justice and sustainability. So they end up having to treat everything like objects, like money, their crops, livestock, the land, workers, their own time. There's a lot of research showing that market settings make people do things that would be considered super unethical in any other setting. So when we go to the grocery store and we're trying to get a deal, we're trying to maximize what we get and minimize what we give. So markets make us treat each other like things to an extent. So the working hypothesis from my research on non-market food systems is that non-market food systems suppress these instrumental values that markets evoke, where we treat the people and ecosystems that feed us as interchangeable means to an end, and in their place, relational values flourish, where we care for and about each other when we share food. We care for and about our gardens or the land that we hunt and forage from. So if we're talking about creating mutually enhancing relationships between each other and between humans and the rest of the mesh of existence, and it's not just relationships as the end goal of the Ecozoic, it's also, as Jen just spoke about in the last session, relationships as the way to get there. I would argue that we need to look at economies without buying and selling a lot more. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Sam. A third presentation in the food trinity here is with Ben Dubey. He's a PhD student at the University of Vermont.
So I do a lot of work around the world of agroecology as well as ecological economics, and there's a basic statement that we can make that undergirds a lot of people's relationship with agriculture, and one of them is two parts of it. Complex is better than simple, and that simple isn't simple. And that's just sort of the fundamental idea that goes behind agroecology, basically that agricultural systems have high returns to structural complexity, and that they're also, even when they're simple, they're more complex than we can think about them as. And basically we could say that 1 over here is better than 2 over there. That's a soybean field in an agroforestry system. But then when we get to policy tools and way to understand it, we run into some problems. So if we're going to use, for instance, mandates and regulations, well, this is harder to describe than that, so it's harder to sort of regulate doing that than doing the one on the left. If we are going to do outcome-based, well, this is a lot larger, so it's a lot easier to monitor, say, water pollution coming from one big farm that has 100,000 acres versus 100,000 small farms that have 1 acre. If we're going to do it model-based, the system on the left is easier to model than the system on the right. And if we're going to do sort of conventional R&D, which is a great policy for agriculture, it's also just sort of harder to understand what works and why it works on the right than it is on the left. And basically, the system on the left is much more bureaucratically legible, in the words of James Scott, than the system on the right. And it means that a lot of the policy tools that we might want to use to promote a more sustainable agriculture just sort of don't fit for the types of systems that we might want in the Ecozoic. And that's sort of one way to thinking about that is that the system on the right is based on relationship, and just bureaucracy doesn't do relationship. So there might be some there's some easy ways or easy edge cases where we can have some simpler policy prescriptions, such as where people have really strong, long-lasting relationships with the land, which includes, but is not limited to, indigenous communities. We want to keep those in place to maintain those relationships, but when we get to places like North America, we have a lot of things to work out in how to do policy. So, thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. Our next presentation is by Joe Ament. Joe recently also defended his dissertation at the University of Vermont. So excuse me, Dr. Joe Ament. And Joe is teaching at the University of Vermont, and he's going to talk to us about an ecozoic approach to money.
Okay, I was a little afraid to give this talk. I'm sorry? Oh, I have to use the mic. All right. Well, I was a little afraid to give this talk transitioning into the Ecozoic because we were trained in economics for the Anthropocene. So I was, what do I do with the Ecozoic? So when I thought about how I was going to frame this, I wanted to frame just a little bit about how we think about money in the Anthropocene, and then how we can use that to think about money in the Ecozoic. But real quick, The mainstream orthodox conception of money, the sort of how we think about money, probably mostly in this room, is that of sort of a gold coin or something, right? It's this material medium of exchange for sort of making barter exchanges pretty efficient. So that's sort of the working model that a lot of economics has that we all sort of were trying to challenge. And some of my research looked at different schools of thought, philosophy, archaeology, history, and a lot of different thinkers about money, and a lot of these people think of money as a social relation, right? So that's a really good way to think about money, and that's what my dissertation sort of delved into, is money as a social relation. It's this sort of accounting system for who owes what to whom and who is owed from one another, right? So that's really great. But what does a social relation do, right? It claims resources. So there's probably some, that probably informs why neoclassical economists tended to look at money as a gold coin, because these social relationships that we think of as money are able to actually have a huge biophysical impact, right? They can extract resources. So when we think about moving from the Anthropocene to the Ecozoic, it's really important to think of money as a social relationship, right? But that's great for the Anthropocene, and the Anthropocene has been dominated by this social relationship in very negative ways. So as we move into the Ecozoic, it's really important to think of money as a social relationship, but also this social relationship that claims resources. So once we move into the Ecozoic, like Thomas Berry said, revitalizing our creative relationship with the environment, we can move from money being simply a social relation and being a socio-ecological relation. So I'm very happy to engage with how we move from that simple social relation that is destructive in the Anthropocene to a relationship with the natural world, and how we use money to claim those resources. Thank you.
Okay, our next presentation is by Daniel Horan Greenford. Daniel is a PhD student at Concordia University.
All right, thanks. So today I'm going to talk about why we can't save the environment by just employing more people and services. So the Sustainable Development Goals lay out a vision for transitioning our current world to one that's more sustainable and more equitable. And SDG 8 in particular posits that we can lift more people out of poverty by growing the economy and employing a lot more people. So this of course necessitates green growth. But is green growth possible on a finite planet? Green growth, of course, relies on decoupling. And you have, of course, two kinds of decoupling. Let's say the one you're more accustomed to hearing about and talking about is decoupling via dematerialization, which means reducing resources and pollutions involved in production, and hence either improving efficiency or fully dematerializing production. Is there any evidence for this? So we've seen some evidence for relative and absolute decoupling, even after accounting for resources embodied in trade at the national level, and for certain industrial inputs globally. However, for the countries that employ most people and services, the affluent world, after accounting for trade, we've actually seen pretty much no evidence of absolute decoupling and very limited evidence of relative decoupling for only certain indicators like greenhouse gas emissions. But even with unexpected and unprecedented technological innovation, there's really no way to grow the economy indefinitely. But what about where we employ people? Much of the discourse today focuses on cleaner employment rather than cleaner production. So let's say this is the second kind of decoupling, which is reducing environmental burdens by shifting the composition of the economy, traditionally referred to as tertiarization, which is the well-trodden path that quote-unquote developed countries have taken to go from resource-extracting countries, primary production, primary sectors, to manufacturing, secondary sectors, to tertiary sectors, the service sectors. But will this actually reduce environmental impacts? So empirical evidence suggests that rich countries actually have increased their greenhouse gas emissions as they increase their proportion of services. What about potential for future gains? A lot of people say services are cleaner, right? And and by shifting to cleaner industries, we're going to actually clean up the economy. So you have people like this internet famous science miseducator who seems to think so, since why not have infinite growth if knowledge is infinite and we just focus on the knowledge economy? But it's not just techno-libertarians. Populist left also has a lot staked on green jobs. So, but it's definitely less egregious because green jobs will decouple. Let's say in this case, growing our renewable sectors will reduce emissions per unit of economic production. But so Tim and I did a study. In our study, we looked at what happens when you include the impact of what people consume at the household to the industries that actually employ them. And sectorally, this creates huge shifts. So what you have here is the service sector growing, still the top position in the first one, growing, doubling for greenhouse gas emissions, and tripling for land use and water consumption, while food production is cut by a factor of 7 for greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and a factor of 10 for water consumption. But if we really want to see what happens for the potential to grow our economy by focusing on services, let's say you have to look at the impact intensity. So after that, we divide by unit production, and we find that pretty much all economic sectors converge dramatically. And so great, thanks. And that's why you can't save the environment by employing more people and services. Thanks. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much. So our next presentation is by Romain Schwartzman. Romain couldn't join us in person, but he recorded a short talk for us. He is a graduate from the PhD program here at McGill University and is currently working at the Bank of France. Romain.
Hello, everyone. I'm really sad I can't be there with you, and I hope you're having a great event. So my research starts from the observation that there have been many discussions on what the Anthropocene means or implies for ethical systems, or legal system or economic systems, and including financial systems, but much less so on what the Anthropocene implies for monetary systems and for money itself. And I believe this is some sort of double tragedy. The first part of the tragedy is that it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to understand economics itself without money. So in this regard, I have focused on two of the rare school of thought in economics that really pay attention to the importance of money, which are post-Keynesian economics and modern monetary theory, MMT, who are actually two very closely related fields. And one key insight of these two school of thought is that they show how once you understand money, you realize that there is no such thing as a lack of money. So that basically the ability to fund an ecological transition should not be a problem once you understand how monetary systems work. However, these two schools of thought have not paid much attention or even any attention to whether we should or we may want to change our relationship to money, and in particular whether we want to consider that money is not something we should be able to endlessly accumulate. And in order to address this problem, which is somehow the second tragedy of money, I have relied on mostly on anthropological and historical approaches to money, which basically show that money is much more than just an economic tool. It's really a symbol that corresponds or that shapes the way value is considered in a society. So the way we create, circulate, and destroy money has changed over history and has been handled in very different ways, including in non-capitalist and non-Western social systems. So in order to think about that, it may seem very far-fetched to think about non-capitalist monetary system, but to some extent, this is something that is already on the table today. We have many proposals related to local currencies, to cryptocurrencies, proposal to nationalize money, among others. And in my research, I focus on one specific aspect, which is the reform of the international monetary system, trying to envision how it could be both more tailored to countries in the global south, so how it could provide them with greater development opportunities, and on the other hand, how it could integrate some dimension of finiteness, so how it could contribute to make money, to make of money a tool that or a symbol that we don't want to accumulate as much as we want today. And I believe that these are two dimensions that are really missing in the proposals of Green New Deal we have as of today, and that will be essential if we want to think about a broader transition, a broader socio-ecological transition toward the Ecozoic.
Okay, so if you have questions for Romain, join Joe's table. Joe's worked quite a bit with Romain, so. Stefano sends his regrets. He was not able to attend today, but his work is on the metabolism of agrarian change in industrial capitalist agriculture, so another food systems themed talk. Okay, so what we'd like to do now is break into another round of table discussion, so everybody up, come on to the front of the room. Let's do this again. That seemed to work well last time. Come on up to the front, and we'll get our speakers placed at tables. There will be 5 tables this time, unlike 6 last time. So let's try to spread into the kind of the corners of the room. All right, so those who would like to join Caitlin, pick a table. Caitlin's going to be right here. Okay, Caitlin Morgan. Sam Bliss. Sam? Right there in the center. Ben Doobie? Go on over there, Ben. So Ben's going to be on the table to the right here, my right. Okay. And Joe Ament. Joe's in the back corner. You can also field questions for Romain. I didn't clear out that with him ahead of time, but. And Daniel. Daniel will be right here in the front. So we've got Joe, raise your hand. Ben, raise your hand. Sam, Daniel, and Caitlin. All right, round 2, ding, ding.
Okay, folks, my apologies again for interrupting, but start wrapping up, answer some final questions. We will take about a 5-minute break and then come back at 11:35 to start the next session. So if you need a quick stretch or bathroom break or food or coffee, now's a good time to start to do that and be back here at 11:35. right, let's get ready for our third round of speed talks. If folks could come back in the room, grab a seat. Maya, could you shout to anyone who's out in the hallway there? Come on back in and we'll get started with our third round of speed talks. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's really been wonderful to see these really vibrant conversations happen with each of our presenters. In this last round, we'll have, let's see, 6 presentations. Unfortunately, David Mallory from York University, our first presenter, was unable to join us and sends his regrets. However, I should say that there is a group at York University that have assembled in a room and are watching the live stream. So other York students are here in spirit. They're with Katie Kish, one of the postdocs for the E4A project here at McGill University, and they're also with Peter Victor, a retired faculty member from York University, who is one of the originators of the E4A project. So I don't know if they're actually watching at this moment, but maybe turn to the camera and everyone wave and say, "Hi, York." Great. Okay, so our first presentation was meant to be David Mallory, and again, he sends his regrets towards a process relational worldview for ecological economics. So our next presentation will be Christopher Orr. Christopher is a PhD candidate here at McGill University. And where is Chris? Here he comes. All right, Chris.
Okay. So Greta Thunberg recently scolded world leaders that in the face of the climate crisis, all they could talk about were fairy tales of eternal economic growth. But long before neoliberalism, climate denial, and the fossil fuel lobby, Canadian leaders clearly considered the alternative and may have even agreed with Greta. In the early 1970s, we know that Pierre Elliott Trudeau met repeatedly with the Club of Rome, even while the Conservatives in their 1972 platform declared that unplanned and unregulated economic growth could not be allowed to continue. So why then does economic growth persist as a primary policy objective? My research explains this paradox as the outcome of a coevolutionary selection process. I use federal party platforms to map the dominant belief system in Canadian politics over the last 150 years. This big picture schematic shows macroeconomic paradigms separated by paradigm shifts. But despite these shifts, certain elements, including economic growth, persist and accumulate over time. And you can see that accumulation. So at these key moments, why are some elements discarded while others are retained? I argue that this can be explained as the entrenchment of elements in the dominant system, even while that system evolves through a sequence of settled and unsettled times. So settled and unsettled times have distinct dynamics. In settled times, elements may become embedded in that system, layered upon but constrained by those existing layers. Whereas in unsettled times, it is more likely that established elements may be questioned and excavated. According to this theory, the 70s were an unsettled time in which entrenched elements were questioned, but ultimately selected for rather than against. Since the 70s, we have been in a relatively settled time that presupposes and largely builds upon the post-World War II growth-based order. So was the 70s a missed opportunity? With the emergence of populism and increasing polarization between the economy and the environment, are we again entering an unsettled time? And what opportunities do unsettled times present for an ecological transformation? Ultimately, my research identifies how unsettled times have unfolded and reveals potential strategies that we might use to navigate towards an ecological future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Our next presentation is by Martin Sayers. Martin is a PhD student at York University, and he's going to talk to us about putting the pieces together. Martin, where are you? Oh, there you are.
Hi, everyone. So imagine you're a macroeconomist temporarily, and you're interested in studying the kind of long-term transition to sustainable energy from fossil fuels. You tend to get two types of questions. One, the erroneous, how do you pay for it? You get it all the time. And the other one, the more reasonable critique from physicists and engineers of energy is a complicated thing, and you need to take that into account. So my dissertation research is on this really easy to say stock flow consistent input-output model, which has an equally inscrutable acronym. But really what it does is it takes a kind of monetary accounting framework for macroeconomics, the stock flow consistency, and merges it with a dynamic input-output analysis. So at the very fastest, stock flow consistency is kind of a way to deal with the transactions in a monetary economy. So you have your representations of household purchases from firms and what have you, and input-output analysis relates the interdependencies of firms towards the final demand output. So these things are both kind of accounting frameworks, and they have similar information in them. And so you can, in a sense, put the two together. You get a whole pile of equations. You solve these down for a couple of nice things called differential equations, and you do some scenario analysis. But really, it's a method to put together the monetary and the potentially useful physical information of energy systems. So why do we care about abstract mathematical models like this? Well, we know going into the Anthropocene, or more hopefully the Ecozoic, we have this kind of immense uncertain future. And these models give us a sort of set of rules that we might be able to understand that by. So I've put up a simple example here of a simulation I did, I think just last week, which shows an economy evolving to a steady state, but still having finance and loans and positive interest rate. This is a controversial result. In fact, there's discussions in this room about this exact thing. But you can take a model like this, you can tweak its parameters somewhat, and you can see that this result disappears. So when we look at these kind of things, they give us a sort of way to test our understanding of the future under different possible sets of parameters or different ideas about energy systems. But it also allows us to kind of answer those more fundamental questions of how do we pay for it? Well, you can address that. And really, can we transition in a monetary economy to an energy one? And we can capture that in there. Anyways, it's a bit of a rambly explanation, but my dissertation is basically working out the mathematics and simulations of this stock flow consistent input-output model. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, our next presentation is by Alice Diamano. Alice is a PhD student here at the McGill University, and will talk to us about we are heading towards disastrous environmental change. Alice.
So, we're heading towards disastrous environmental change, and it's time to reconsider our path. Now, this line that I draw on my slide is just a line that I draw on my slide, but it's very similar to many lines that I saw during the studies about human impact on the environment. Basically, things were pretty stable for a long, long, long time, and then, bang, colonization, industrialization, great acceleration, and we have taken this path that is leading us towards disastrous environmental change, climate change, etc. And so what is my approach to address this? What is my approach to well, my approach is to shift towards an ecozoic path, a better path that is based on the fact that I'm looking at what was happening here, what were the mindsets that we were following here, and what are instead the mindsets that we're following now that we are on this path. And basically, it turns out that this path is very much based on Western ideas of economics and on how our system should be, while here we were following other kinds, alternative ways. But these ways are actually still around us. And so what I'm doing basically is, well, I could choose, there are many non-Western perspectives, but I chose to focus on the indigenous ones. And so what I'm doing is first listening to indigenous voices, and then questioning our current path in the light of these voices, in the light of what they say about the human-art relationship, about the current system. And third, reviewing our current path. I am a Western person, I can't talk in anybody's name, but I am a Western person questioning my own path in the light of our other paths. And the aim is to shift our path towards a better one. And what I'm doing is questioning first economics. Of course, we're all in some way questioning economics. But economics says that we have to maximize our utility, but we can't really maximize something if we don't know everything that is needed to know to maximize it. And so, yes, economics tells us that when things don't work well, we can solve it through economic tools such as insurances, etc., but they provide solutions that are for the economic problems, but not for the problems outside economics. And then another point that I'm doing is behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is an ally in what I'm doing because it also questions mainstream economics. But behavioral economics is also quite Western, and it's also can also be reviewed because some things that behavioral economics points out as biases are actually good things we should leverage on to have a more cautious and respectful relationship with the environment. And I'm also discussing how economics is taught, and because it's bad that we are still teaching students bad things, questionable things as if they were objectively real and true. And all this with the aim of improving the human-art relationship and improving our decision and switching our path toward a more respectful and cautious one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Alice. Oops. Okay, so our next presentation is by Matthew Burke. Matt finished his PhD here at McGill University as part of our first cohort and is now a postdoc at the University of Vermont. Matt.
Thank you. Good to be here with everyone. Good morning. Okay, so for my contribution today to Ecozoic futures, I'll make the case for energy commons. We understand it's dangerous to uncritically adopt the same perspective on energy as we've been accustomed to through the era of fossil fuels, namely the commodification of energy, which for renewable energies enables concentration and accumulation of land and technologies and ensures that development proceeds according to logics of financialization, extraction, and profit rather than serving genuine human and non-human needs. What might be considered as global commons are in practice approached as open access regimes, inspiring new modes of enclosure in terms of rights to wind and sunlight. In this context, renewable energy risks reproducing the social ecological harms of existing energy systems while resulting in energy addition rather than transition. Energy as a commons offers a repurposing of energy systems toward mutual aid and sharing. And by energy commons, we're referring to shared flows of energy for all living beings existing prior to and outside of conventional systems of property. Elements of an energy commons would include a biophysical process like sunshine and wind, a community of people responsible for accessing and sharing this process, the value created through the relationships among people in place, and the collective rules used to govern these relationships and ensure their reproduction. I'm interested in understanding what can be learned from practices of energy commoning and resistance to enclosure, how this knowledge and experience can help to reimagine energy futures, and what institutions are available now that might provide a bridge to ecozoic energies. Fortunately, we can find many examples of institutions for energy commons in the way of diverse, community-based, and collectively organized renewable energy systems. These would include cooperatives, municipal utilities, micro and mini grids, and also importantly, reforms of land ownership and constitutional rules. And following Ostrom's work, I also find a set of design principles useful for creating the conditions necessary for these institutions to endure generation after generation. So which of these design principles are most critical now? Both research and experience suggest an important insight that the actual tragedy is less about misuse or failure of the commons and more about the regularity and brutality of enclosures. So for more, I invite you to join me at the table and we'll together examine the possibilities for energy commons. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. Our next presentation is by Caleb Gingrich Reger. Caleb was unable to join us in person, but did record a voiceover for a few of his slides. Caleb finished his master's at McGill University as part of our program and is now the energy officer for the Catholic School Board in Waterloo.
Hi everyone, my name is Caleb Gingrich. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today. My work is titled Finding the Phoenix, Building an Ecozoic Energy System Without Climate Collapse or Energy Scarcity, and is motivated by the core observation that building a global low-carbon energy system requires a huge amount of energy to build a bunch of new infrastructure. That energy has to come from the fossil fuel system. So the question then becomes, how much of our remaining carbon budget do we need to allocate to this extra economic activity that has to happen on top of running the rest of the global energy system? And can we do that without energy scarcity across the world? I answered this question through secondary data analysis. I worked from Jacobson's plan for a global low-carbon energy system in 2050 based entirely on wind, water, and solar energy technologies. There's a huge amount to unpack there. But I combined that plan with life cycle assessment data on the embodied energy in a wind turbine and a solar panel, and then constructed a simple projection of what the transition could look like from 2012, which is when the most recent data was available, to 2050. The result is that roughly 5 to 10% of the 2-degree carbon budget, would be required, which means this transition is possible, but still not easy. Another key result is that simply transitioning the energy system to low-carbon technologies by 2050 is not enough. We have to ramp up production of renewables by 30% per year for the next decade, or that initial ramp isn't fast enough. We can avoid energy scarcity under the scenarios that I've described. However, it's worth flagging that these models don't take into account they don't take into account redistributing energy usage across the globe to address the massive inequalities that exist in current energy consumption. There'd also be lots of work that could be done on what it would mean if the industrialized world reduced their energy consumption not by a factor of 2, as is assumed here from increased efficiency, but by a factor of 10 or 15 as we transition away from continuous economic growth and a culture of consumerism to something that is more ecozoic.
Great, thank you so much. And so for our final presentation for this third round of speed talks, we'd like to welcome to the stage Allison Adams. Allison is a PhD student at the University of Vermont. Allison.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Allison. I'm going to be talking about just a very small portion of my PhD research. As many of you probably know, ecosystem services assessment, though deeply flawed, is gaining a fair amount of traction in policymaking arenas and environmental management arenas. And unfortunately, ecosystem services assessment does a really good job with only a couple of things, biophysical assessment and monetary valuation, and doesn't do a great job with the kinds of sociocultural values that are really important to underlying a lot of place-based cultures, including the culture of the Kanaka Maoli in Hawaii. Those are native Hawaiian people who I've been working with in Hawaii. And they also, sociocultural values are also potentially really important for our underlying motivations to protect the environment. So not accounting for these things and how we're protecting the environment is really, really critical. I did some work in Hawaii as part of a larger project asking this question: how do perceptions of coral reef value differ in terms of ecosystem services categories? And I'm going to talk today about specifically cultural ecosystem services, so those sociocultural non-material values between user groups in West Hawaii. And I've been working on this with NOAA as well as the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So I asked about 350 people on beaches this question, or roughly this question: what do coral reefs mean to you? And I got answers that some of them looked kind of like this. I would say coral reef is like, as an islander, it's like a part of our family, you know? It's like, yeah, it's like a part of our family, coral reefs. And I took these answers and sorted them into different cultural ecosystem services and relational values categories. So for example, this one would have been kinship, and I did that with all of the different answers that I got. I'm ultimately going to be doing a cluster analysis, which will be a little bit more nuanced, but I was really interested in seeing if these things, sort of at a broad picture, if there were any differences that were just coming out if I actually counted the answers and the different groups that those were aligning with. And the groups I was most interested in looking at were ones that are relevant for the post-colonial context and the racial power dynamics in Hawaii. So looking at tourists, looking at native Hawaiian people, and then non-native local Hawaiians. So this is what I got in terms of the different responses, and this is a lot of information. These are the different cultural ecosystem services and relational values categories that I looked at, and I'll just break down two of the main patterns. So this is one. You can see that tourists value aesthetics and recreation a lot more than native Hawaiians do, and non-native Hawaiian locals also really value recreation. This is important because these are the things that are most easily studied and most often already incorporated into management plans. So these are the kinds of things people are already thinking about. On the inverse, things like heritage, identity, stewardship, these kinds of values that are much harder to measure and that are much less often incorporated into management are the kinds of things that tend to be more important for native Hawaiian respondents, and then also often for people who live in Hawaii. Who are not native Hawaiian, and that's because there's a lot of native Hawaiians. The culture is pretty dominant there, and so people who live there start to incorporate some of those kinds of values into the way that they're thinking about the land. So what I'm doing is I'm working with NOAA and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and a small team to try and figure out how can we better incorporate these kinds of values that are really important for the culture in Hawaii and also important for our sort of underlying motivations and relationship with the environment to better protect and better manage shoreline ecosystems so that these kinds of things are being cared for and not just the kinds of values that are important to visitors.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much to all of our presenters from this morning. So this will be our final round of our table discussions. So you know the drill. Everybody stand up. Come on up to the front. We'll allow our speakers to pick a table unobstructed.
come on up to the front. We will have 5 tables again, since one of our presentations was by video. No. 1, 2. Yeah, 5. Okay. So, Chris, where's your table? Right here. Chris Orr, over here. The paradox of growth and the promise of unsettled times. Martin. Martin is going to be over there, putting the pieces together, combining stock flow consistent macroeconomics with input-output analysis. Alice, where will you be? Alice will be in the back corner. Alice, we are heading towards disastrous environmental change. It's time to reconsider our path. Matt Burke. Matt will be in this corner over here. Energy commons and alternatives to the enclosures of sunshine and wind. And Allison Adams. Allison will be right here in the front. From fish to family, beachgoer, perceptions of coral reef, cultural ecosystem services. So one more time. Allison, raise your hand. Nice and tall. Alice. Great. Chris. Matt. And who am I missing? Martin. And Martin. Okay, one more round.
Can you hear me okay? Have your attention, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll wait till I give people about a minute just to settle down wherever they want to end up and sitting. And so I'd like to ask all of the leadership for the Ecozoic students who are here just to stand up so we can recognize you and see your faces and say hi. So I've got a few people who aren't here, but most are. So we're going to move now to start shifting toward the concept of the Ecozoic quite a bit more. And wanted to make a couple of remarks about what ecological economics is first, right? And then talk more about that. So one of the principal arguments in favor of ecological economics, which is yet a compelling one, is that we have to recognize that the economy is connected to the Earth and and operates according to the principles of physics. And this is, of course, a foundational principle of ecological economics. But we don't often take the next steps to say that, well, if we're going to be a science-based project and science-based thinking, you can't sort of take the laws that you like and ignore the ones you don't. You have to take the whole ball of wax. And that has, of course, very radical implications for how we conceive of the human and how we conceive of our place in the cosmos. So this is it opens a big door into problems of metaphysics and theological problems about the nature of humans and what humans believe and what we believe about our place in the universe. So I just want to make sure it's clear that we had a great morning, terrific analysis of our current problems, and we also in these projects we work on these more fundamental questions of conceptualization that are important. So I think of it as kind of goodbye Michelangelo, right? The picture from the Sistine Chapel, right, where God is creating Adam, to hello to the Ecozoic, right, which is a bit more of a humble creature. Creatures are in the Ecozoic, and one of those sentences that's always astonished me for its simplicity and its importance is the one, since I've heard it, is the one from Thomas Berry. The world is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. And the first time I heard that, I had no idea what it could mean. I just thought, well, that's a strange collection of words, right? And then the more I've thought about it, the more it's true that subjectivity is actually widespread. And Eduardo Cohn's book, Thinking Like a Forest, right, carries this argument really forward in a very, very systematic way. And once you grasp this very simple idea, see the world entirely differently. And so if those of you who are coming down to the farm at the end of this meeting, will see communication and hear communication, will be abundant, right, around us between plants and animals. And so it's really a fantastic eye-opener to the beautiful and plentiful abundance of life and our ability to share this and experience it. So Ecozoic is a term coined by Thomas Berry and Brian Swim. Brian will be with us this afternoon over Zoom to talk about what this word means to him and where it came from and his conversation with Thomas Berry when the term was coined. And it represents just a vision of which we've talked about a little bit, where we have to change our relationship to one of mutual respect and enhancement rather than of plunder, which is, as we've talked about most of the morning, not working. And the target of this project has been the notion that the universities are really keeping us pretty strongly on the wrong track, right? And I'll let you fill in your university that's doing that. I certainly have had some unpleasant exchanges with my undergraduate school about their teaching of economics. So I think it's important to hold the universities to a standard of teaching where respect for the earth is an intrinsic part of the curriculum, right? And I always recognize or recommend David Orr's What is Education For? It's an old article, but a hell of a good one. And so anyway, that's sort of where we're trying to get headed with all of this. And there we are, having a good time, right? Frozen lake, right? And a good place to go skiing and hopefully not crawl through the ice. So I'm going to ask Ellie, you want to join me here at the, keep that up there, that's a happy picture.
So we get to try to, sum up and distill a little bit of the wisdom and the ideas that have been discussed and raised for us in way too short presentations, but actually really stimulating and interesting ones this morning. And I would just like to point out that it seems to me that the students who have been in the room today and many of those who also have graduated from the E4A program, I'm speaking particularly of master's students, who are all out in the world working. That's why they weren't able to come today, but some are community developers, some are working for foundations, some have gone on to do more academic work, but many of them are already out there doing ecological economics and our form of ecological economics for the Anthropocene in very practical ways. I think that what I heard of the presentations this morning, the things that you're all working on, there's on the table, right? Like, let's think of it as a sort of a banquet table. We have tools, we have case studies, we have pilot projects, we have models, we have systems, we have theories, and this discussion of values, I think, was really important, and several students talked about that. And these are all key building blocks, I think, and also people have looked, particularly, we're all drawn to look at what are the points of transformation, since we know things must change. So where are our points of intervention where our work can be particularly effective? I think that the value that this demonstrates, it has been so clear for me today, is that we share and benefit from an intellectual community where we can keep considering all of these things iteratively together across sciences, across economics, across humanities, social sciences. We come from different places and we have different perspectives on all these things, but we listen to each other with respect, and we're striving to build some kind of a change process together. And I think that the other thing that has been really exciting for me is to see some of you working very much at the local scale, some considering things at global scales, and everything in between. And so another one of the things that we're learning and doing together is considering these questions of how do these change processes all interrelate, and how can the crisis that we find ourselves in, which is a global crisis, but with local manifestations everywhere, how can those scales be bridged? I think it's really exciting, and I just want to salute all of you and those who are not here today, but who have been part of this process as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, so just a final word of reflection and wrap up. Thank you all again. Wonderful presentations, fantastic conversations. So really appreciate you leaning into what we did this morning. I do want to say that as we've framed this two-day symposium as Anthropocene to the Ecozoic, and we've learned a lot along the way in these last 6 years. For those of us who are here as part of that first cohort, you probably remember, like, day one, week one, hour one, it was like, Anthropocene? We don't like that word. Like, oh boy, here we go. And it was great. We've had some wonderful debates around the word Anthropocene, because Anthropocene, in one sense, is meant to sort of signal that we now live in a human-dominated era, a human-dominated planet. And one interpretation of that would be congratulations, humanity, we did it, right? We took over the earth, woohoo! Or another interpretation that would be a warning signal, right? That this spells disaster. And so we struggled with these different interpretations that we saw in the public around the Anthropocene. And at the time, we thought we were being innovative economics for the Anthropocene. And since then, everyone and their brother and sister talks about the Anthropocene. So it's really been quite a bandwagon. And it was wonderful to be part of that early envisioning of what an Anthropocene means, especially for our more normative disciplines like economics and finance and law and governance and ethics and philosophy. So as we've pivoted to the Ecozoic, it really has come from our community to really claim a word, claim a space, claim an idea that right from the outset is more about healing, is more about restoration, is more about justice, that signals that you don't have to question what exactly do we mean, what kind of Anthropocene. Is it a congratulation? Is it a reconciliation project, right? Or is it some kind of emancipation project? Ecozoic is really meant to signal a reconciliation project. So we're really happy that some of the students from the L3E cohort are here, really the 5th cohort of this program. As you talk and mingle during lunch, I hope you get a chance to talk about their work. I imagine a day, not in the not too distant future, we'll have a symposium and hear all about their research and ideas. And also pivot towards the conversation this afternoon of what would an era of reconciliation, an era of reparations, an era of restoration imply in policy circles. And Sam Bliss and Leah Temper have designed a wonderful program that starts this afternoon and goes in tomorrow morning about using the kind of ideas from the Green New Deal framework and taking some of the work that we've been doing around ecological economics, Ecozoic thinking, to apply that to what does this work imply to a Green New Deal? What does it mean? And we've heard already some of that this morning. So if you saw Sam this morning in the presentation, where's Sam? Sam is in the back there. So Sam and Leah will be, is Leah, Leah's right here, and Leah Tempered. Sam and Leah have designed a beautiful program this afternoon. So if you get a chance to chat with them at lunch, they will be around. Brian swims tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon, Steve Posner from the Gund Institute and Brian Swim will be zooming in from California. Steve has arrived too, so Steve is here. So if you get a chance to talk with Steve, at the close of the program tomorrow, we're going to be having a session that the L4E students actually have designed on see if we can bridge this gap between the big idea of the Ecozoic and the day-to-day experience of policymaking. So, yes, Sam.
I want to announce we're going to break for lunch. We're going to be coming back here at 2:30.
2:30?
Super long lunch for everybody. But at 2:15, I need the facilitators, Matt, Maya, Nina, Meg, Laura, and one person who's I'm going to volunteer to be the facilitator of money and economics sometime during lunch. 2:15, right here for like 10-minute meeting. So you have a tiny bit shorter.
Great. So facilitators meet at 2:15. Everyone back 2:30 sharp. Lunch is served.